Jenny's wrists burned where the silver chains bit into her skin, the metal searing through the thin fabric of her servant's dress, as two guards hauled her through the obsidian doors of the grand hall. The vast chamber stretched before her like a maw of darkness, lit only by floating orbs of crimson flame that cast dancing shadows across the faces of the assembled vampire court. She stumbled, her bare feet scraping against the cold marble floor, and the murmurs began immediately. Whispers that slithered through the crowd like serpents. "A human," someone hissed from the left gallery. "In the king's private library, no less," another voice added, dripping with contempt. Jenny's heart hammered against her ribs as the guards forced her to her knees at the base of the dais. She kept her eyes down, her dark hair falling forward to hide the tears threatening to spill. She had only wanted to learn, to read the books forbidden to servants, to understand the world beyond the endless scrubbing of floors and polishing of silver. But she had been caught, and now she would pay the price. The crowd parted as heels clicked across the marble with deliberate precision. Jenny didn't need to look up to know who approached. She could smell the sickly sweet perfume that always preceded Daphne Ashford, the king's closest advisor, and the woman who had discovered Jenny hunched over an ancient tome in the library's restricted section just hours before dawn. "Your Majesty!" Daphne's voice rang out, clear and sharp as broken glass. "I present the thief who dared violate the sanctity of your personal collection. This creature was found defiling texts that contain our most sacred histories." Jenny finally lifted her gaze, and her breath caught. At the far end of the dais sat Simon Blackwood, the vampire king, ancient beyond measure and beautiful in a way that made mortals weep. His eyes were the color of midnight storms, his features carved from marble and shadow. He sat utterly still upon his throne of black stone, one hand resting on the armrest, his expression unreadable. "And what do you recommend, Lady Ashford?" His voice was deep, resonant, like distant thunder rolling across mountains. Daphne smiled, and there was nothing kind in it. "The ancient punishment for such transgression is clear, Your Majesty. Blood theft. She consumed our knowledge with her unworthy eyes." She turned to face Jenny, her smile widening. "Let her blood be consumed in return. The crimson blade awaits." The court erupted in approving murmurs. Jenny's blood turned to ice. The crimson blade. She had heard the other servants whisper of it in terrified tones. An ancient execution method reserved for the gravest offenses. The condemned was bound to an altar, and the ceremonial blade, said to be forged from the blood of the first vampire lords, would pierce their heart. But it was not a quick death. The blade would drain every drop of blood from the victim's body while keeping them conscious, aware, suffering for hours until nothing remained but a desiccated husk. "Please," Jenny whispered, her voice barely audible. "I only wanted to read. I meant no disrespect, no theft. Please." "Silence," Daphne snapped, her hand shooting out to grip Jenny's hair and yank her head back. "You don't speak in the presence of the king unless given permission, worm." Jenny bit back a cry of pain, her scalp burning where Daphne's fingers twisted cruelly. Through blurred vision, she saw Simon's eyes narrow slightly, his gaze fixed on where Daphne held her. Something flickered across his face, too quick to name, and then it was gone. "The law is clear," Simon said, rising from his throne with fluid grace. "Theft of forbidden knowledge carries a blood price." He descended the dais steps, each footfall echoing through the silent hall. "Prepare the chamber!" The guards hauled Jenny to her feet and dragged her through a side corridor, Daphne following close behind with barely contained glee, the court trailing like ravens scenting death. They entered a circular chamber deep in the palace's heart, its walls carved with ancient symbols that seemed to writhe in the torchlight. In the center stood an altar of black stone, and above it, suspended by chains of pure silver, hung the crimson blade. Jenny's legs gave out at the sight of it. The blade was as long as her forearm, its surface the deep red of arterial blood, and even from across the room she could feel it calling to something deep in her bones. The metal seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat, and the air around it shimmered with heat. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Daphne purred, circling Jenny like a predator. "I've always wondered what it would be like to witness the Crimson Blade's work. Thank you for giving me this opportunity." The guard slammed Jenny down onto the altar, forcing her onto her back against the cold stone. Her arms were stretched above her head and shackled to iron rings, her ankles secured the same way. She was spread-eagled and helpless, her chest heaving with panicked breaths as Daphne stepped forward, reaching up to grasp the chain holding the blade. "Wait!" Simon's voice cut through the chamber. Daphne froze, her hand on the chain, her expression flickering with annoyance before she smoothed it into compliance. "Your Majesty?" Simon approached the altar, his eyes roaming over Jenny's face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was close enough now that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the silver threading through his black hair at the temples. Close enough to see that his gaze held something other than condemnation, something that looked almost like curiosity. "The ritual requires the condemned to speak their final words," Simon said, though Jenny had never heard of such a requirement. "What drove you to risk everything for forbidden texts, girl?" Jenny's throat worked, her mouth dry as bone. She could lie, could beg for mercy, could maintain the silence that had been her shield for 23 years of servitude. But what did it matter now? In minutes, the blade would pierce her heart and her blood would flow. The truth would die with her. "My mother," she whispered, her voice cracking. "She died when I was 10. She used to tell me stories about the old world, before the vampires claimed dominion. About humans who learned alongside the immortals, who were valued for their minds as much as their blood." Tears tracked down her temples into her hair. "I just wanted to know if any of it was true. If there was ever a time when someone like me was worth more than the blood in my veins." Silence fell across the chamber, thick and suffocating. Jenny closed her eyes, waiting for Daphne's mocking laughter, for the court's derision. But it didn't come. When she opened her eyes again, Simon was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read, his jaw tight, his hands curled into fists at his sides. "Your mother's stories," he said slowly. "What was her name?" "Catherine," Jenny breathed. "Catherine Wells. Why does it—" "Enough of this!" Daphne interrupted, her voice rising with irritation. "Your Majesty, the sun will rise in 3 hours. The ritual must be completed before dawn, or the blade's power will be compromised." Simon's gaze snapped to Daphne, and for a moment something dark and dangerous flickered in his eyes. But he stepped back with a slight nod, his face once again an impassive mask. "Proceed." Daphne's smile returned, triumphant and vicious. She yanked the chain and the crimson blade descended with a soft whisper of metal through air. As it lowered toward Jenny's chest, Daphne's hands closed around the hilt, and her eyes glittered with barely suppressed excitement. "This is going to be exquisite," Daphne murmured, positioning the blade's point directly over Jenny's heart. Jenny squeezed her eyes shut, her whole body trembling. She thought of her mother's smile, of the small room they had shared before illness took her, of the dreams that would die here in this dark chamber. The blade's point pressed against her chest, and she felt the first sting as it began to pierce through fabric and skin. The earth moved. A tremor rolled through the chamber, subtle at first, then stronger, sending dust cascading from the ceiling. Daphne stumbled, her grip on the blade loosening and the weapon twisted in her hands. Its edge sliced across Jenny's left palm as the shaking intensified, and Jenny gasped as white-hot pain lanced up her arm. But it wasn't just pain. The moment her blood touched the blade, everything changed. The weapon began to glow. Brilliant crimson light pouring from its surface like liquid fire. Daphne shrieked and released it, jumping back as the blade clattered onto Jenny's chest and then slid down to rest against her bleeding palm. Heat surged through Jenny's hand, up her arm, flooding through her veins like molten metal. She screamed, her back arching off the altar as the blade's surface seemed to liquefy, flowing into the cut on her palm. The pain was beyond anything she had ever imagined, as if every nerve in her body had been set ablaze, as if her very blood was boiling in her veins. "What's happening?" Daphne shrieked, backing away further. "Your Majesty, the blade, it's—" "Everyone out!" Simon's voice cut through the chaos like a whip. "Now!" Jenny barely heard the scramble of footsteps, the protests from the court. Daphne's shrill objections drowned out by Simon's roared command. All she knew was the fire consuming her from the inside out. The sensation of something foreign and ancient flooding through her bloodstream, rewriting everything she was at the cellular level. Her vision went white, then red, then black. When it cleared, she was staring up at the vaulted ceiling, and Simon was leaning over her, his hands on either side of her head, his face inches from hers. His eyes were wide, shocked, and gleaming with something that looked like awe. "Impossible," he whispered. You're still alive." Jenny tried to speak, but her throat wouldn't work. Her whole body felt wrong, different, as if she were wearing someone else's skin. The chains around her wrists had gone slack. No, not slack. Broken. She lifted her hands, staring at them in confusion. The cut on her palm had sealed itself, leaving only a faint silver scar in the shape of an ancient rune. And her skin, it was luminous, almost glowing, veins of faint crimson light pulsing beneath the surface. What did you do to me?" she managed, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, richer, deeper, resonating with harmonics that hadn't been there before. Simon's hands moved to her shoulders, not restraining but steadying, his touch surprisingly gentle. "I did nothing," he said, his eyes searching hers. "The blade chose you. It recognized something in your blood, something that should be impossible." "I don't understand." The crimson blade was forged a millennium ago from the blood of the 3 progenitors, the first vampires, the origin of all our kind. For 1,000 years, it has been used to execute those who threaten our laws. But the legends say— He paused, his thumb brushing across her cheek in an unconscious gesture that made her breath hitch. "The legends say that if someone of true ancient bloodline touched the blade, if their heritage was pure enough, the blade would not take their life. Instead, it would give them its power. Jenny's mind reeled. But I'm human. I'm nobody. I'm a servant. You were human, Simon interrupted, helping her sit up. Look at yourself, Jenny. She glanced down and gasped. Her servant's dress had torn during her transformation, and beneath the ragged fabric, her skin glowed with that same inner light. But it was her reflection in the polished surface of the altar that made her heart stop. Her eyes. They had changed from ordinary brown to a striking amber ringed with crimson. And when she opened her mouth in shock, she saw the delicate points of fangs. No, she breathed. No, this can't be real. I can't be. You're not fully vampire, Simon said quickly, his hands on her arms again, grounding her. Whatever blood runs in your veins, your mother's heritage, it was dormant until the blade awakened it. You're something new, something I've only read about in the oldest texts. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. You're a scion, the first in over 500 years. Before Jenny could process this, the chamber doors burst open. Daphne stormed in, flanked by 6 members of the High Council, their faces set in hard lines of disapproval. Daphne's eyes widened when she saw Jenny sitting up, alive, transformed, and her expression twisted into something ugly. Sorcery! She spat, pointing a shaking finger at Jenny. She's used dark magic to corrupt the sacred blade. Your Majesty, she must be destroyed immediately, before she— Careful, Daphne, Simon said, rising to his full height and stepping partially in front of Jenny. His voice carried a warning that made even the counselors hesitate. You're speaking of destroying something that may be the key to our people's survival. An elderly counselor with a scar bisecting his face stepped forward. My king, with respect, we know nothing of what this creature has become. The transformation is unnatural. We should contain her until— Until what? Jenny found herself speaking, her new voice ringing with unexpected authority. She stood, ignoring how the world seemed sharper now, how she could hear every heartbeat in the room, smell the fear emanating from Daphne in acrid waves. Until you can find a way to kill me? To undo what your own sacred relic has done. Daphne's face flushed with rage. You dare address the council directly, you little— Enough! Simon's voice cracked like a whip. He moved fully in front of Jenny now, his body a wall between her and the others. I will handle this matter personally. The rest of you are dismissed. Your Majesty, the council must vote on— the scarred counselor began. I said dismissed. The power in Simon's words was undeniable, rolling through the chamber like a physical force. The counselors bowed, though their faces showed clear disapproval, and filed out reluctantly. Daphne remained, her hands clenched into fists at her sides, her eyes burning with hatred as they fixed on Jenny. This isn't over, she said quietly, the words a promise of retribution. Whatever you think you've become, you're still just a servant who got lucky, and luck runs out. Leave now. Daphne's jaw tightened, but she turned and swept from the chamber, her footsteps echoing long after she disappeared from view. The heavy doors slammed shut, leaving Jenny and Simon alone in the flickering torchlight. Jenny's legs gave out suddenly, the adrenaline draining from her system and leaving her shaking. Simon caught her before she could hit the floor, his arms strong and steady around her waist. Easy, he murmured, guiding her to sit on the edge of the altar. Your body is still adjusting. The transformation takes time. I don't understand any of this, Jenny whispered, staring at her hands. The silver scar on her palm seemed to pulse with its own light. Why would the blade do this? My mother was human. She never mentioned anything about ancient bloodlines or dormant power. She was just a seamstress. Simon was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her skin tingle. Catherine Wells, he said finally. I knew your mother, Jenny. Not well, but I knew her. Jenny's head snapped up. What? 24 years ago, there was a woman who worked in the palace, a seamstress with dark hair and kind eyes. She was human, but she had a quality about her, something that made her different from the others. The palace's head vampire physician, Dr. Marcus Thorne, took an unusual interest in her. He conducted private examinations, blood tests, and then, suddenly, your mother left the palace. She was pregnant, and she vanished into the human quarter. His eyes searched hers. I never knew what became of her. I'm sorry I should have looked for her. Jenny's throat tightened. She died in poverty, she said, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Whatever this blood is that I carry, it didn't save her. It didn't keep her from wasting away from fever while I held her hand and prayed to gods who didn't answer. Jenny, don't, she cut him off, tears spilling over. Don't tell me it meant something. Don't tell me there was a reason. She suffered, she died, and now I'm this thing, and I don't even know what I'm supposed to do with it. Simon's hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears with surprising tenderness. What you're supposed to do, he said softly, is survive and thrive and show every vampire in this kingdom that you are exactly as powerful and worthy as the blood running through your veins declares you to be. The sincerity in his voice made her breath catch. She had never been looked at this way, as if she mattered, as if her existence was something precious rather than an inconvenience to be tolerated. Why do you care? She whispered. You were going to execute me. You would have let them kill me. His jaw tightened, and something that looked like guilt flickered across his face. I would have stopped it, he said quietly. I was searching for the words, for the justification that wouldn't make me look weak in front of the council. I was a coward, and I'm sorry. But why? I'm nobody to you. You reminded me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, of why I became king in the first place, of the world I wanted to build, one where humans and vampires could coexist, where knowledge was shared, not hoarded, where someone like you could read in my library without fear of death. His eyes bored into hers. You reminded me of the man I used to be, before centuries of politics and power plays made me forget. Jenny didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. They stayed like that, his hands on her face, her heart racing in her chest, and she realized with a start that her heart was racing. Vampires didn't have heartbeats, or at least not like this. I can feel it, she said, pressing a hand to her chest. My heart. It's still beating. Simon's expression softened. Like I said, you're not fully vampire. You're something else. A hybrid. The blade didn't transform you. It awakened what was already there. He dropped his hands reluctantly and stepped back, But that makes you dangerous, Jenny. Not because of what you might do, but because of what you represent. Change, evolution, a threat to the established order. Daphne, Jenny said, the name tasting bitter on her tongue. Daphne Ashford has spent 200 years consolidating power in this court. She controls half the council through favors and blackmail, and she's been positioning herself as my future consort for the last decade. His lip curled in distaste. I've resisted, but she's patient and cunning. And now you've appeared, and you represent everything she despises. A human elevated to power, a disruption of her carefully laid plans. She'll try to kill me. She'll try, Simon agreed, his eyes hardening to chips of obsidian. And she'll fail. Because as of this moment, you are under my personal protection. Anyone who moves against you moves against me. Jenny's breath caught. Why would you do that? Why would you risk your political standing for... Because you're a scion, he interrupted, stepping close again. Do you understand what that means? The legends say that scions carry the blood of the progenitors in its purest form, that they can walk in sunlight without burning, that they can create new vampires without the need for the traditional blood rite, that they can... He paused, his eyes roaming over her face. That they can birth a new generation of vampires, free from the weaknesses that have plagued our kind for millennia. I can't. You don't have to do anything right now except survive, Simon said. But you will stay in the palace, in quarters near mine. You will learn to control your new abilities, and you will let me protect you until you're strong enough to protect yourself. It wasn't a request, but there was something in his eyes, a vulnerability beneath the command, that made Jenny realize he was asking, not demanding. He wanted her to choose. This. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. Simon's shoulders relaxed fractionally, and he offered her his hand. Come, we need to get you somewhere safe before the court realizes you're not in a dungeons. Jenny took his hand, and the moment their skin connected, she felt it. A jolt of recognition, like touching a live wire. Simon's eyes widened, and she knew he felt it too. This strange pull between them that went beyond simple attraction. It was deeper, older, written into the very blood the crimson blade had awakened in her veins. The bond, he murmured, staring at their joined hands. I can feel it. The blood recognizes its match. What bond? When a scion awakens, the legends say they become bound to the vampire whose blood called to them most strongly. A soul bond, deeper than any marriage, more permanent than any vow. His thumb stroked across her knuckles. I didn't believe it was real. But I can feel you, Jenny. Your emotions, your fear, your confusion. And you can feel me, can't you? She could. Now that he'd named it, she could sense the steady presence of him at the edge of her consciousness. His protectiveness, his concern, the fierce determination to keep her safe, and beneath it all, something warmer, more intimate, that made her cheeks flush. Yes, she admitted. But I don't know you. How can we be bound to each other when we're strangers? Then we'll get to know each other, Simon said simply. I have centuries of stories to share. And I want to know everything about you. Every thought, every dream, every moment that made you who you are. Before Jenny could respond, a distant bell began to toll, deep, resonant notes that echoed through the palace halls. Simon's expression darkened. The dawn bell. We have an hour before sunrise. He tugged her toward a hidden door in the chamber's far wall. This way. We can't risk the main corridors. They moved through a series of narrow passages, the air growing colder as they descended deeper into the palace's foundations. Jenny's new senses were overwhelming. She could hear conversations happening 3 floors above them, could smell the tang of old blood and stone, could see perfectly in the pitch darkness. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. They emerged in a lavish suite of rooms that took Jenny's breath away. Silk hangings adorned the walls, plush carpets covered the marble floors, and through tall windows, she could see the sky beginning to lighten with the approaching dawn. Your Majesty, the sun! The glass is treated. No sunlight penetrates these rooms. You'll be safe here. He guided her to a chair and then moved to a cabinet, pulling out a crystal decanter filled with dark red liquid. You'll need to feed soon. The transformation will have left you hungry. As if his words triggered it, Jenny suddenly became aware of a gnawing emptiness in her stomach, a thirst that had nothing to do with water. Her fangs ached, and she pressed a hand to her mouth in horror. I don't want to hurt anyone. You won't. This is donated blood, freely given by humans who work in the palace. He poured the liquid into a glass and brought it to her. It's not the same as feeding from a living source, but it will sustain you until you're ready for that step. Jenny took the glass with trembling hands and raised it to her lips. The moment the blood touched her tongue, her eyes widened. It was like nothing she had ever tasted, rich and complex, with layers of flavor that spoke of the donor's life, their emotions, their very essence. She drank deeply, unable to stop herself, and when the glass was empty, she felt the gnawing hunger recede to a manageable level. Better? Jenny nodded, setting the glass down carefully. Thank you. Simon settled into the chair across from her, his gaze never leaving her face. Tell me about your life before today. I want to know who you were before the blade changed everything. So Jenny told him. She spoke of growing up in the human quarter, of her mother's gentle hands and sad smiles, of learning to read by candlelight, using stolen scraps of paper. She told him about the other servants, the ones who were kind and the ones who were cruel, about the dreams she had harbored of someday, somehow, being more than what she was born to be. And Simon listened, really listened, his eyes never straying, his expression intent. When she finished, the sky outside had brightened to the pale blue of early morning, and she felt wrung out, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical. Rest, Simon said, rising and offering his hand again. The bedchamber is through there. Sleep, and when you wake, we'll begin your training. Where will you be? Right here, he promised. I'm not leaving you unguarded, not with Daphne plotting. As if summoned by her name, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Simon's expression hardened, and he motioned for Jenny to move to the bedroom. She slipped through the doorway but left it cracked, her enhanced hearing easily picking up the conversation. Lady Ashford, it's rather early for a visit. Your Majesty, forgive the intrusion. Daphne's voice was honey over steel. But the council is in an uproar. They demand to know what you intend to do with the creature that defiled the Crimson Blade. Her name is Jenny, and what I intend to do is none of the council's concern. With respect, Your Majesty, everything that threatens the stability of the kingdom is the council's concern. This girl, this thing, she's an abomination. Part human, part vampire, bound to no one. She's bound to me. Silence. Jenny could practically feel Daphne's shock radiating through the door. What did you say? The blood bond has formed. Jenny is my intended mate, my consort, and the future queen of this realm. Simon's voice dropped to a lethal purr. And if anyone, council member or otherwise, makes a move against her, they will answer to me personally. Are we clear? You can't be serious. She's a human, a servant. She has no training, no breeding, no right to— She has every right. The blade chose her, Daphne. The blood of the progenitors recognized her as worthy. Can you say the same? The venom in Daphne's response was palpable. This is a mistake. The council will never accept her. The other courts will see it as weakness, and when they come for her, and they will come, don't expect me to stand in their way. Then I suggest you choose your side carefully, because when the dust settles, I will remember who stood with my consort and who stood against her. Now get out. Footsteps retreated, and the door slammed hard enough to rattle the windows. Jenny emerged from the bedroom to find Simon standing with his back to her, his hands braced on the desk, his shoulders tight with tension. You shouldn't have done that, she said quietly. You've made her an enemy. You've risked your position for someone you barely know. Simon turned, and the intensity in his gaze stole her breath. I told you the truth, Jenny. The bond is real. I can feel you in my blood, in my bones. And even if the bond didn't exist— He crossed the room in 3 long strides and cupped her face in his hands. I would still choose you. I would still fight for you. Because in 24 hours, you've reminded me what it means to want something more than power, to care about someone more than politics. Simon. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, a question rather than a demand, his lips soft against hers. But when she made a small sound in the back of her throat and leaned into him, it deepened, became something urgent and claiming. Jenny had never been kissed before, but her body seemed to know what to do, her hands sliding up his chest to his shoulders, her lips parting under his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Simon rested his forehead against hers. I've lived for 500 years, he murmured, and I've never felt anything like this. Neither have I, Jenny whispered, which was true in more ways than one. Over the following weeks, Jenny's life transformed completely. Simon assigned her a suite of rooms adjacent to his own and hired private tutors to teach her about vampire society, history, and politics. She learned to control her new abilities, the enhanced strength and speed, the heightened senses, the ability to compel humans with her voice. She learned which members of the council could be trusted and which were firmly in Daphne's pocket. And she spent every evening with Simon. They took walks through the palace gardens after sunset, talking for hours about everything and nothing. He told her stories of the old world, of the wars between vampires and humans, of the uneasy peace that followed. She shared her memories of her mother, the small joys of her servant's life, her secret dreams of freedom. The bond between them grew stronger each day, a constant, warm presence at the back of her mind. She could sense his moods even when they were apart, could feel his concern when she pushed herself too hard in training, his pride when she mastered a new skill. But Daphne's shadow loomed over everything. The council member made her displeasure known at every turn. She challenged Jenny's right to attend council meetings. She spread rumors among the court that Jenny had bewitched the king with dark magic. She attempted to have Jenny's quarters moved to the servants' wing, citing tradition and propriety. Simon blocked every move, his support unwavering. But Jenny could see the strain it put on him, the way the other counselors grew more restive with each passing day. The whispers that the king had gone soft, that he was being controlled by his infatuation with a former servant. It all came to a head one night, 6 weeks after the Crimson Blade had changed Jenny's life forever. She was making her way back to her rooms after a particularly brutal training session with the palace's weapons master when she heard voices coming from a side corridor. She recognized Daphne's sharp tones immediately and paused, pressing herself against the wall to listen. "The summit is the perfect opportunity," Daphne was saying. "Representatives from all the major courts will be present. If we can arrange a demonstration of her inadequacy, her inability to handle the role she's claimed." "You're talking about public humiliation, my lady," another voice said, one of the council members, though Jenny couldn't place which one. "The king won't stand for it." "The king is blinded by the bond, but the other court leaders aren't. They'll see her for what she is, a jumped-up human playing at being vampire royalty. And when they reject her, Simon will have no choice but to set her aside or risk political isolation. And then you'll finally have the position you've coveted for so long." "Exactly. The summit is in 3 days. Make the arrangements." Jenny's blood ran cold. She slipped away silently and found Simon in his study, poring over documents with a furrowed brow. The moment she entered, his head came up, and concern flooded the bond. "What's wrong?" She told him everything she'd overheard. Simon's expression grew progressively darker, his hands clenching into fists on the desk. "She's planning to sabotage you at the summit," he growled. "I'll have her removed from the council immediately, arrested for treason." "No," Jenny said, surprising them both. "No? If you arrest her now, she'll cry persecution. She'll claim you're executing anyone who questions your judgment. It will only make things worse." Jenny moved around the desk and took his hands in hers. "Let her try whatever she's planning. I'll face it head on. And I'll prove to every vampire in that summit hall that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." Simon studied her face, pride and fear warring in his expression. "Jenny, the other court leaders are brutal. They'll look for any weakness, any excuse to challenge you. Then I won't give them one." "You've changed," he murmured, bringing her hands to his lips. "From the terrified girl on the altar to this, you're magnificent." "The blade chose well, didn't it?" "The blade chose perfectly." The 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Jenny worked with her etiquette tutor to perfect every bow, every formal phrase, every subtle gesture of vampire court protocol. She sparred with the weapons master until her muscles screamed, determined to be able to defend herself if things turned violent. And every night, she and Simon spent hours talking, strengthening the bond between them until it felt as natural as breathing. The night of the summit arrived. The grand hall had been transformed, filled with representatives from the 7 major vampire courts across the continent. Lords and ladies in elaborate finery filled the galleries, their eyes gleaming with predatory interest as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Jenny stood beside Simon at the front of the hall, wearing a gown of deep crimson silk that matched the rune scar on her palm. Her hair was swept up in an elegant arrangement, and a delicate crown of silver and rubies rested on her head. The consort's crown, a statement of her position and Simon's intentions. Daphne stood among the council members, her expression serene, but Jenny could feel the malice radiating from her. Simon rose, his voice carrying through the hall. "Esteemed representatives, I welcome you to the Court of Shadows. Tonight, We gather to discuss matters of mutual concern, trade agreements, border disputes, and the growing unrest in the human territories. The business of the summit proceeded smoothly at first. Treaties were negotiated, disputes mediated, alliances reinforced. But as the night wore on, Jenny could feel the tension building, could see the glances directed her way, the whispers behind cupped hands. Finally, Lord Castellan of the Western Court rose, his scarred face twisted in a sneer. Your Majesty, before we conclude, there is a matter that concerns us all. This human you've elevated to consort, the other courts require proof that she is worthy of such a position. Simon's jaw tightened. Lady Jenny is a scion, awakened by the crimson blade itself. Her worthiness is beyond question. So you say, Lady Morgana of the Northern Court drawled, but we have only your word and the word of your council. Perhaps a demonstration is in order. Daphne stepped forward, her smile sharp as broken glass. I propose a trial by combat. Let the scion prove her strength against a worthy opponent. If she prevails, we will accept her as consort without further question. Simon was on his feet in an instant. This is ridiculous. Jenny has nothing to prove to... I accept. Every head in the hall turned to Jenny. Simon's shock reverberated through the bond, along with his fear. Jenny, you don't have to do this. Yes, I do, she said quietly, meeting his gaze. If I'm to be your consort, your equal, I need to prove that I can stand on my own, that I'm more than just the girl you saved. Daphne's smile widened. How brave. And who shall be your opponent, I wonder? I will. A massive vampire stepped forward from the Eastern Court's delegation. Lord Draven, known throughout the courts as the Executioner. He stood 7 feet tall, his body corded with muscle, his eyes the red of fresh blood. Scars crisscrossed his arms and chest, testaments to countless battles. Jenny's enhanced hearing picked up the gasps from the galleries, the muttered predictions of her swift defeat. But she kept her chin high, her expression calm, even as fear clawed at her throat. Jenny, please. She touched his hand briefly, sending warmth and determination through the bond. Trust me. The grand hall was cleared, creating a large open space in the center. Lord Draven removed his jacket, revealing arms covered in ancient battle scars. He cracked his knuckles, his grin savage. I'll try to make this quick, little scion, for the king's sake. Jenny stepped into the circle, her heart racing but her hands steady. The moment the challenge was formally declared, Draven moved. He was fast, faster than anything she'd trained against. His fist came at her face like a battering ram, and she barely ducked in time, feeling the wind of his blow whistle past her ear. She rolled away, putting distance between them, and heard the crowd's derisive laughter. Running already? Daphne called out. How very human of you. Draven charged again, and this time Jenny didn't dodge. She let the ancient instincts the blade had awakened guide her, let the power in her blood rise to meet the challenge. When his fist came at her, she caught it. The impact reverberated up her arm, but she held firm. Draven's eyes widened in shock as she pushed back, matching his strength with her own. The crowd's laughter died instantly. I'm not running, Jenny said quietly. I'm fighting. She twisted, using Draven's own momentum against him, and sent him stumbling backward. Before he could recover, she was on him, her fists moving in the patterns the weapons master had drilled into her. Draven blocked most of the blows, but a few got through, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. She's actually making him work for it, someone murmured from the galleries. Draven's expression turned serious. He stopped toying with her and launched a genuine assault, a barrage of strikes that would have pulverized a normal vampire. But Jenny wasn't normal. The blade's power sang in her veins, and she met him blow for blow, her smaller size and greater speed giving her an edge she exploited ruthlessly. The fight raged for what felt like hours. They crashed through furniture, shattered columns, left scorch marks on the floor where their power clashed. Jenny felt her dress tear, felt blood, her own this time, run down her arms from a dozen minor cuts. But she didn't stop, couldn't stop, because she could feel Simon through the bond, his fear and pride and fierce protectiveness. She could sense the court's shock as they realized she wasn't just surviving. She was winning. And she could feel Daphne's rage building like a storm. Finally, Jenny saw her opening. Draven overextended on a punch, and she ducked under it, pivoting to slam her elbow into his ribs. Something cracked, and he grunted in pain. Before he could recover, she swept his legs out from under him and pinned him to the floor, her hand at his throat. "Yield," she commanded. For a long moment, Draven stared up at her, his chest heaving. Then, slowly, he smiled. "I yield, Lady Jenny. Well fought." The hall erupted. Some vampires cheered, some looked stunned, and a few, those in Daphne's faction, looked furious. Jenny stood, offering Draven her hand and helping him to his feet. He bowed to her, a gesture of genuine respect, before returning to his delegation. Simon was at her side in an instant, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes blazing with pride and relief. "You were incredible." "I learned from the best," Jenny murmured, swaying slightly. Lord Castellan rose, his expression thoughtful. "The Scion has proven herself in combat. I, for one, am satisfied." He turned to the other delegates. "I propose we formally recognize Lady Jenny as the King's consort and heir to the Court of Shadows." One by one, the other courts voiced their agreement, some grudgingly, some with genuine approval. Finally, only Daphne's faction remained silent. "Lady Ashford," Simon said, his voice cold as winter. "Do you have any further objections?" Daphne's face was a mask of barely contained fury, but she was trapped. To object now would be to openly defy the will of the other courts. "No objections, Your Majesty." "Good. Then I believe this summit is concluded." As the delegates began to file out, offering their congratulations to Jenny in passing, Daphne approached. Her smile was poisonous. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts," she hissed. "This isn't over. I will find a way to destroy you." "You can try," Jenny replied quietly. "But know this. I'm not the scared servant girl anymore, and if you come for me again, I won't hold back." Daphne's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing more, sweeping from the hall with her supporters trailing behind her. Simon drew Jenny into his arms, holding her close. "I thought I was going to lose you." "You couldn't. We're bonded, remember? You're stuck with me." "Good, because I have something I've been waiting to ask you." He pulled back and, to Jenny's shock, sank to one knee in the middle of the grand hall. The few remaining delegates stopped to watch, murmurs of surprise rippling through them. "Jenny Wells," Simon said, pulling a small box from his jacket. "I know we haven't known each other long. I know our bond was forged in crisis and blood. But I also know that you are the bravest, strongest, most magnificent woman I've ever met. And I don't want to spend another night without knowing that you've chosen me, not just because of the bond, but because you want to." He opened the box, revealing a ring of silver and ruby that matched her crown. "Will you marry me? Will you be my consort, my partner, my queen? Not because the blade chose you, but because I'm choosing you." Jenny's eyes filled with tears. She had been so focused on surviving, on proving herself, that she hadn't let herself think about what came after. But now, looking down at Simon's hopeful face, feeling the love pouring through their bond, she knew exactly what she wanted. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." The remaining delegates burst into applause as Simon slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that made her toes curl. When they finally broke apart, he was grinning like a fool. "I love you, Jenny." "I love you too." 3 months later, Jenny stood in the grand hall once more, but this time it was filled with flowers and candlelight, the air thick with anticipation. She wore a gown of white silk embroidered with silver thread, the consort's crown replaced with a bridal circlet of rubies and diamonds. Her hand bore not just her engagement ring, but also the silver scar from the crimson blade, a permanent reminder of how far she'd come. The ceremony was a blend of vampire and human traditions, honoring both halves of her heritage. Simon stood at the altar in formal black, his eyes never leaving her as she walked down the aisle. The officiant, an ancient vampire who had served the court for 1,000 years, spoke the traditional words, but Jenny barely heard them. All she could focus on was Simon, on the bond thrumming between them, on the future spreading out before them like an unwritten book. "Do you, Simon Blackwood, take this woman as your eternal mate, your blood-bonded consort, your queen?" "I do." "And do you, Jenny Wells, take this man as your eternal mate, your blood-bonded consort, your king?" "I do." "Then by the power vested in me by the ancient laws and the sacred blood bond, I declare you eternally joined. You may seal the bond." Simon cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, and the bond exploded between them, not painful, but overwhelming in its intensity. Every barrier fell away, and for a moment, Jenny could feel everything he felt. His love, his pride, his absolute certainty that she was his match in every way. She hoped he could feel the same from her, that she had chosen him not out of duty or gratitude, but because he made her believe in herself, made her see her own worth. When they pulled apart, the scar on her palm glowed briefly, and Simon's matching mark, one that had appeared the night of the summit, blazed in response. They were bound, not just by magic or ceremony, but by choice. The feast that followed lasted until dawn. Vampires from all the courts came to offer their congratulations, to witness the first scion wedding in 500 years. Even Daphne appeared, though she kept her distance, her expression carefully neutral. Jenny knew the threat wasn't over. Daphne was too proud, too ambitious to accept defeat. But tonight wasn't about her enemies. Tonight was about celebrating love and new beginnings. As the sun began to rise and the guests departed, Simon swept Jenny into his arms and carried her to their shared quarters, no longer his rooms and hers, but theirs, together. "Hello, my queen." "Hello, my king." He set her down gently, his hands sliding to her waist. "Are you happy?" Happier than I ever thought possible, Jenny admitted. 6 months ago, I was a servant girl who thought her greatest achievement would be learning to read. Now I'm married to a king, I'm a scion, and I have a future I never could have imagined. You've earned every bit of it. Not because of the blade, not because of the bond, because of who you are. Your courage, your strength, your refusal to let anyone make you feel small. He kissed her forehead gently. I'm in awe of you every single day. Simon, I mean it. And I promise you, Jenny, I will spend every day of our eternal existence making sure you know how extraordinary you are. Jenny pulled him down for a kiss, pouring all her love and gratitude and hope into it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart, a sound she would get to hear for the rest of her very long life. In the months that followed, Jenny settled into her role as queen with a determination that surprised even herself. She implemented reforms that opened the palace library to all vampires, regardless of rank. She established schools where humans and vampires could learn side by side. She created a council position specifically for human representation, ensuring their voices were heard in court decisions. And she hunted. When Daphne made her next move, and attempted poisoning that nearly killed one of Jenny's human advisors, Jenny was ready. She gathered evidence methodically, built an airtight case, and presented it to the full council. Daphne was stripped of her titles, her lands, and exiled to the outer territories, her power finally broken. The other courts watched with interest as Jenny transformed a court of shadows from within. Some admired her innovations. Others feared them, but none could deny that the Scion Queen had brought a new era to vampire society. 5 years after the Crimson Blade changed her life, Jenny stood in the palace gardens, her hand resting on the small swell of her belly. The doctors had said it was impossible. Hybrids couldn't reproduce. But the blade had made her something more than hybrid, and the child growing inside her carried both her human heritage and Simon's vampire blood, creating something entirely new. Simon came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. Can you feel her? Yes, she's strong, like her father, and brave, like her mother. Jenny leaned back against him, watching the sun set over the kingdom they ruled together. Do you ever think about how different things would be if I hadn't gone to the library that night? Every day. And every day, I'm grateful that you were brave enough to seek knowledge, even when it was forbidden. He turned her in his arms, his eyes soft with love. You changed everything, Jenny. Not just my life, but the entire vampire world. You proved that strength comes in many forms, that worth isn't determined by birth, and that sometimes the greatest power lies in the courage to be yourself. That's very poetic for someone who wanted to execute me once. I will regret that moment for the rest of eternity. Don't. If it hadn't happened, the blade never would have chosen me. We never would have bonded. Everything that came after, the good and the bad, led us here. She placed her hand over his heart, and I wouldn't change a single moment. Simon kissed her, slow and sweet, and through their bond, Jenny felt the depth of his love, his pride, his absolute certainty that they were exactly where they were meant to be. The Crimson Blade hung once more in its chamber, dormant now that its purpose had been fulfilled. It had taken a servant girl and transformed her into a queen, had sparked a bond that would reshape vampire society for generations to come. And if the ancient weapon could have spoken, it might have said that it chose perfectly. that Jenny Wells was always meant to be extraordinary, that she just needed the right catalyst to set her power free. In the end, the girl who had been told she was worthless became the woman who proved that worth is not given, it is claimed, fought for, and earned through courage, love, and the unshakable belief that everyone deserves a chance to rise. And she rose higher than anyone ever imagined. Did you like the story? Do you want a part 2? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Also, big shout out to our viewers from Fort Wayne, Indiana, USA, Canada, Michigan, London, Queensland, Birmingham, UK, Long Island, New York, Albany, Central Florida, California, Missouri. Thank you for being part of my small, humble community. To our growing viewers, comment below which state you're watching from so I can give you a shout out in the next video. Don't forget to subscribe so you can stay updated on our next uploads. Thanks for watching!